He walks tall and carries a butcher knife. The boogeyman only wants to take your life. Kill him off, he'll just come right back in part 2. Wednesday 13 really hit the nail on the head with this one, as he succinctly described the trope of slasher movie villains. As popular as it was in the late 70s and early 80s, the slasher movie genre has largely fallen off in favor of different flavors of horror, replaced by the torture prawn flicks in the early 2000s to the more elevated horror movies of the contemporary era. The slasher has all but faded away. Which is honestly a damn shame in my humble opinion. There's something universally frightening about being hunted by an unstoppable force, an entity that reminds us that we are not as safe as we think we are. This fear is exacerbated by the plausibility of the scenario. Ghosts, werewolves, vampires, and so on aren't real. But serial killers sure as hell are, and that is what makes this specific horror genre so impactful. Even when they aren't trying to be impactful, slashers are great. They're like a Cannibal Corpse song in movie form.
This is about shooting blood from your cock.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. As terrifying as they can also be just as comedic. Once the violence shown on screen reaches a certain point, it just becomes absurd, and the fear that we once felt morphs into laughter at the over-the-top things that are happening. That's the beauty of the genre. It's so broad in how its tropes can be interpreted. We feel legitimate fear for Laurie Strode as she flees her elder sibling, but we also burst out laughing when Jason bonks a person in a sleeping bag to death. Damien Leone, writer and director of Terrifier, clearly understands all of this. His first feature film is nothing if not a love letter to slasher films, standing on the shoulders of giants and borrowing from films of the past to create what is as close an approximation as one can get to the platonic form of a slasher. Nowhere is this more clear than in the antagonist of the work, Art the Clown. Because what really makes a slasher film is the person doing the slashing. From the stoic behemoth that is Jason Voorhees to the chatterbox characterization of Frederick Krueger, homicidal maniacs come in all shapes and sizes. And Art manages to epitomize all of those variations. He's the perfect chimera of both ends of the slasher spectrum touched on earlier. A mime. Well, obviously he's a clown, but he does a bunch of mime stuff, and I can't be bothered to look up the distinction between the two. Suffice to say, Art is the silent killer that we have come to know and love in Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, and the like. But he's also the cheeky, snarky slayer that we see in the characterization of Mr. Krueger. This hybridization of slasher tropes works to great effect, particularly in conjunction with the preposterously violent acts that the character engages in. This seems like as good a point as any to point out that there are probably a total of 20 YouTube-friendly minutes in this movie. So in the interest of not having my video be TOS'd into oblivion every time I talk about the things that Mr. the Clown is doing to these unfortunate women, I'm just gonna have some puppies on the screen. Enjoy. Art bifurcates a woman in the way one would least like to be bifurcated. He flays the skin off another woman's chest and does a Buffalo Bill, but with boobs. He eats the face of that woman's sister while she is still alive. Not to mention caving in skull after skull after skull of any soul unfortunate enough to get in his way. Slasher movies are always thought of as violent, but the violence of Terrifier is taken to new heights. What's more is that he seems to revel in these acts of violence much more deeply than the majority of other slasher movie antagonists, who, to one degree or another, just seem to kind of hit it and quit it in regards to their victims. But Art plays with his food. And play is more than likely the proper word to describe what Art is doing to his victims. Other antagonists in the genre have more clear motivations to one degree or another, but Art has no such thing. As far as the audience can tell, Mr. the Clown is doing all of this for what essentially amounts to shits and giggles. His victims aren't negligent camp counselors, promiscuous teens, or the like. They're just normal people. Normal people who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this unfortunate serendipity adds a patina of realism to the narrative as a whole. This could be real. This could happen to you if you were as unfortunate as these people. My favorite scene in the movie is the one with the firearm for this exact reason. I'll reiterate that I don't want to be TOS'd, so enjoy the puppies and use your imagination. In the climax of the arc of the first protagonist, Tara has Mr. the Clown on the proverbial ropes. he is down for the count, and the woman, presumably fueled by adrenaline, is prompting her assailant to get up, which is dumb. But you know, what are you gonna do? No one in this movie has apparently ever seen Zombieland. But I digress. The ostensible final girl is ostensibly about to overcome the boogeyman. The protagonist is about to win and get away. Until Art pulls out a gun and just fucking shoots her. The first time I watched this, I lost my mind. This is just such an incredible, genre-defying scene that works so well on a couple of different levels. The first level is, bad guys in slasher movies don't use guns. They just don't. They use machetes, chainsaws, the trunks of trees, and basically anything but a gun. This eschewing of firearms is just part and parcel with being a slasher movie antagonist. So when Mr. the Clown just pulls out a gun and plugs the woman, there is a genuine sense of shock and anticlimax at this moment. It's very similar to the scene in Indiana Jones with the swirly sword guy. In both instances, the abrupt nature of the weapon discharge catches the audience off guard and jolts us back to attention at this unforeseen turn of events. The second level that this scene works on is in the characterization of Art himself. Mr. the Clown is not a hulking brute of a man like Mr. Voorhees or Mr. Myers.
Do I make you horny, baby? Yeah!
No, the other one. He, at least in this film, does not have the same supernatural capabilities as a Mr. Krueger or similar. He's just a guy, and kind of a scrawny wimp of a guy, as evidenced in the Buffalo Bill but with boobs scene later in the movie. In a fair fight, any one of these final girls could more than likely take this small waif of a manlet. The only reason that these women are in the position that they are in is because Mr. the Clown got the drop on them and crippled them in one way or another. Art needs to cheat, and what better way to cheat than bringing a gun to a rebar fight? I'm not saying that Terrifier is the best slasher movie by any stretch of the imagination. Overall, the plot is a bit plotty, and the runtime seems to be padded with a couple of superfluous narrative appendages. For instance, I couldn't see any real narrative purpose for the homeless woman to be in this movie other than to allow Art to display some nebulous mommy issues that really are never touched on again. The use of the false final girl is interesting in concept, but in practice did not work particularly well. It just seemed to me like at a certain point, the script was lacking, so Mr. Leone kept coming up with ways to get more and more people into a building with Art and inflate the runtime of his first feature film. That being said, while I do think that the film itself is somewhat middling, I think that the antagonist of the film was anything but. The character of Art the Clown is an amalgamation of the many killers that have come before him. A chimera of carnage, if you will. His expressive silence speaks volumes, and he is all the more frightful for it. His deeds are more dastardly than one would have thought possible, elevating what was already a particularly violent genre into something that is somehow even more so. Finally, and most frighteningly, his existence is plausible, at least in this movie. Art the Clown is not some supernatural entity, back from the grave for this reason or that. He isn't an unstoppable force on the prowl for misbehaving teens. He's just a psychopath with a bag of toys. He's the last thing you would want to see when you're walking home for the night. He's
the boogeyman.